My name's Nathaniel Morris. This is me rehearsing for this documentary. I'm making the documentary to try to explain how dyslexia has influenced the way I see economics. In fact, my dyslexia has led me to develop an economic theory. Most of the time, dyslexia makes many things difficult for me that other people find easy. Sometimes, though, dyslexia makes something easy for me that other people find difficult. I have an unusual way of looking at economies. If you give me a chance to explain my perspective, I'm hoping you might come to see the whole field of economics in a new light. In essence, I believe that the underlying mechanism that allows economies to stay in balance is the same mechanism that facilitates ecosystems to stay in balance. I think it's important that this relationship be studied further because it could hold the key to protecting and growing our economy. In order to better explain this theory, I think it might be helpful if I explain where it comes from. As I said, I'm dyslexic. Usually when I tell people that, they ask me if that means that I read words backwards like dog and God. The answer is yes, but there's more to it than that. My brain cannot handle two-dimensional images. When I see the word dog written in 2 dimensions, my brain must construct a 3-dimensional image of that 2-dimensional image in order to even begin the process of identifying the word. Furthermore, my mind's eye is not fixed in one place. It's mobile, viewing these 3-dimensional images from a number of possible angles. So that's the way I see words, but my brain does not just construct 3-dimensional images out of 2-dimensional words. It also creates 3-dimensional images of abstract concepts. This is sort of what an ecosystem looks like inside my head. The process by which an ecosystem stays in balance never takes on a physical form in the real world. It does inside my head though, and that physical form looks kind of like a whirlpool. There are reasons why my brain created this image to represent an ecosystem. First and foremost, they are both about group behavior. If you look at one water molecule in a whirlpool or one animal in an ecosystem, all you see is chaos. If you take a step back and look at the behavior of groups, like the different currents in a whirlpool or the different species of animal in an ecosystem, a much clearer organizational structure emerges. The most striking aspect of this organizational structure is that it is cyclical. Both whirlpools and ecosystems are incredibly adaptable to changing conditions. Having said that, they both do have specific needs. If those needs are not met, both ecosystems and whirlpools will simply cease to be. I've been fascinated by animals and ecosystems since I was a small child. I'm not sure when I first started visualizing ecosystems like whirlpools, but the more I studied them, the more solidified and clear the image became. I've worked with animals through my teens and into my 20s. A few years ago, I enrolled in college. I did not want to take economics, but it was a required class, so I gave it a shot. I was nervous because I'm horrible at math. At the time, I really didn't know much about economics. The only reason I had the confidence to even try taking a college-level economics class was because of the images inside my head. When I picture a free market economy, in my head it looks like a tornado. Now, I am not an expert on whirlpools or tornadoes, but I knew one thing. That tornado sure looks a lot like that whirlpool. All of the reasons my brain makes an economy look like a tornado are the same reasons my brain makes an ecosystem into a whirlpool. Again, group behavior is critical. If you look at one air molecule or one person in an economy, all you see is irrational chaos. It's only when you take a step back and observe the behavior of groups do clear patterns and evidence of a broader system emerge. It's also immediately obvious that both economies and tornadoes are cyclical. They're both able to adapt to ever-changing conditions. Most importantly, they both have specific factors that, if not present, will cause them to cease to be. When I got to college, I was shocked to discover that there is no currently accepted link between free market economies and ecosystems. I'm shocked because this seems really important and frankly really obvious. I understand if you're not looking at it as a tornado next to a whirlpool, maybe it's not that obvious, but it is still really important. Think of it this way. Ecosystems are very well understood. We have a huge wealth of data on how they operate, how they stay in balance, and how they collapse. Free market economies, on the other hand, are mostly human-made and very poorly understood. It's reasonable to assume that if we analyze the parallels between free market economies and ecosystems, we might be able to generate some very important lessons on how best to manage our economy. The American economy currently faces the threat of collapse. While almost everyone agrees that the threat of economic collapse is real, the specifics are cryptic at best. I believe this is because most people do not clearly understand the way a free market economy stays in balance, generates wealth, and is vulnerable to collapse. As I said earlier, it is noteworthy that there is no widely accepted theory about the relationship between ecosystems and free market economies. This is despite the fact that both economists and biologists commonly reference each other's fields using metaphor to better explain their own field. In fact, neither biologists nor economists have an accepted explanation for how even their own respective systems stay in balance. I believe comparing ecosystems to economies can help shed some much-needed light on this fundamental question of how they stay in balance. By stay in balance, I mean how it is that many groups, acting independently and pursuing their own self-interest, can spontaneously form an interdependent system where most needs are met most of the time. These groups are typically able to sustain themselves for long periods of time under ever-changing conditions. In order to analyze how both economies and ecosystems accomplish this extraordinary feat, I figure we should use some simple deductive reasoning to examine what the two systems have in common. By this I mean, first analyze what factors all ecosystems that stay in balance have in common. Then analyze what factors all economies that stay in balance have in common. Lastly, compare which of these factors the two systems share. It is reasonable to suspect that the parallels this line of reasoning generates could help reveal the underlying mechanism responsible for creating balance in both systems. So I did that, and I found 9 parallels. Number 1, the passage of time. If you view any ecosystem or economy in an instant of time, some things appear to be out of balance. It's only when viewed over the passage of time that these imbalances can be seen to resolve themselves. In nature, the intergenerational nature of adaptation makes change incremental. In free market economies, time is needed to allow for imbalances to resolve themselves without unnecessarily straining the system. Number 2, distinctly different groups. Fundamental to the process of creating balance is the existence of distinctly different groups. In free market economies, the different groups are corporations and businesses. In ecosystems, the different groups are species of plants and animals. In nature, this is a well-understood principle known as biodiversity. Biodiversity in ecosystems is analogous to decentralization in free market economies. This means the more different types of groups there are, the more stable and productive the whole system is. Number 3, groups' ability to change. For a balance to be maintained under ever-changing circumstances, individual groups must have the ability to change and adapt. In nature, animals change their appearance and life strategies in order to remain competitive and survive. In free market economies, businesses adapt and innovate in order to enrich themselves and remain competitive. Number 4, groups are forced to compete. Groups must be forced to compete with each other in order to ensure that those left are there based on their competitive merits. In nature, this means that only the strongest and best adapted species are able to remain intergenerationally. In free market economies, this means only businesses that are able to offer the best products and services at the lowest prices are able to enrich themselves. Number 5, groups motivated by self-interest. Both free market economies and ecosystems require their groups be motivated by self-interest. In nature, this manifests in plants and animals acting out of necessity, doing what it takes to survive. In free market economies, the profit motive is the unifying force that drives business productivity and innovation. Exception to self-interest. Equally important to both the individual groups and the system as a whole is an ever-present exception to the self-interest motive. In nature, this manifests in the drive to reproduce and raise young. In free market economies, this should manifest in the taxation of large profits from the most successful companies and businesses. This is an example of natural taxation. Number 7, exploitable resources. In order for either economies or ecosystems to function, there must be exploitable resources. In nature, this takes the form of food. In free market economies, this is goods and services. Number 8, demand for resources. Equally important to the presence of resources is demand. In nature, food that nothing will eat is useless. In free market economies, products and services nobody wants are useless. Number 9, currency. Vital to a balanced and flourishing economy or ecosystem is currency. In nature, this is caloric energy, first being generated by plants, consumed by animals, and then passed from one animal to the next in the form of predation. In free market economies, this is money. This is another form of natural taxation. When we print cash, it serves as a passive tax on accumulated wealth. By potentially slightly depreciating the value of the money currently in circulation, printing money is a simple way of taxing the rich. The catch is that should the dollar collapse in value, it can take the whole economy with it. For this reason, the printing of currency is one of the most important functions of government.